Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Bob Pittman, the CEO of iHeart Media, which is the #1 audio company in the United States and the world, reaching 9 out of 10 Americans each month, primarily through radio, but also through podcasts on its iHeart Radio app. In addition to iHeart, you may recognize some of Mr. Pittman's other ventures. He is the co-founder of MTV, the co-founder of Casa Tequila, CEO of AOL Networks, Six Flags Theme Parks, Century 21 Real Estate, and Time Warner Enterprises. Some have described him as the Dos Equis man of business, and Sean Parker, founder of Napster and first president of Facebook, calls him the only media mogul who is genuinely an entrepreneur. In addition to his entrepreneurship, Mr. Pittman is an interesting success story. He has varied business interests, and it shows through the sheer breadth of companies he's led. He also has an interesting background, growing up as the son of a preacher in Mississippi and getting his first job at 15 as a DJ for his local radio station to earn money for flying lessons. So, Mr. Pittman, thank you for coming to speak with us, and we are eager to learn from your entrepreneurial journey and getting some advice on how we can move through both of the business world and our personal lives. So thank you.
Well, I don't know how good my advice will be, but it's free, so it's got some advantage.
Sure, that's great. Any advice is great advice, in my opinion. But yeah, let's get started. So I guess first question I have for you is that, running many businesses as a young person must have been tough. However, you have a unique philosophy on decision-making and learning from mistakes, which are generalizable to any industry. We at Stanford sometimes feel that making a mistake is the end of the world, which can be paralyzing. Could you touch on that philosophy, specifically the fear of making the wrong decision?
Sure. Look, I think if you're a genius, you get it right half the time. And the biggest danger is people get paralyzed because they're afraid to make a mistake. They never move forward. And you're going to have to try a lot of things till you figure out what works. And by the way, the first time you try something, it probably doesn't exactly work the way you wanted it to. You're going to have to evolve it. You're going to have to change it. And sometimes you're just going to say, it just didn't work, and move on. And as I tell people, they start trying to figure out, I say, you can't figure it out. It's unknowable. You just got to try it. Give it your best shot. And I think the biggest problem people have is they hang on to things that don't work. And I talk about this when I talk about the concept of weeding the garden, because if you think about, I'm going to make these numbers up, but the concepts, the important part, if you try 10 things, maybe 2 are clear winners and 2 are clear losers. They're just such losers, stinkers. You go, wow, that was a bad move. The problem is you have 6 in between, and most people let those 6 live. And the truth is they're not very good. They're mediocre. They really didn't do what you wanted them to do. They're not so terrible that you've got to get rid of them right away, but they eat up your resources. They confuse you, and they turn your company into mediocrity. The great executives kill everything except clear winners, because when if you get rid of 6 mediocre ideas, you got a lot of resources and a lot of time and effort that you can redeploy looking for big, clear winners. And I think that the focus ought to be not on avoiding failure, but it's finding success.
Got it. So finding success. I guess, you going into the audio industry from a small town to a big city must have been intimidating, especially with your philosophy of you have to find success. But you mentioned that you didn't do it alone in the beginning, and you credit a lot of your early learning to your mentor, Steve Ross. And I was wondering, how beneficial was it to have a mentor like Steve when you're first starting out? And most importantly, how did you find him?
You know what? I have mentors all along the way. And I've had Steve was probably my most significant in many ways, because I learned so much about business. He sort of took me under his wing. I was a kid in my 20s, and Steve took me to meetings I shouldn't have gone to and gave me this incredible education. Sort of, I think, wanted to give me the pass down of what he had learned in his information. But I had an earlier mentor, Charlie Warner, who I was in radio in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I met Charlie. And Charlie was I'm this kid from Mississippi. I don't know anything about how things work. And here's a guy that went to Dartmouth. He went to St. Albans in Washington. He worked at CBS back when that was the greatest job you could have. He was good looking. He dressed well. He knew what restaurants to go to. I didn't know any of that stuff. And Charlie's the first one to sort of put his arm around me and said, you know, kid, you got some talent here. And Charlie took me to Chicago and gave me my programming job at NBC when I was 20 years old. And he and I went to New York together when I was 23. And I think about it sometimes. It goes, I was 15 years old on the radio in Brookhaven, Mississippi. And 5 years later, 20 years old, I'm programming the NBC station in Chicago. Now, at the time, I thought, well, of course, I deserve that. I look back on it now and go, wow, that was just like ridiculously dumb luck. But I took advantage of it. And so every step of the way, there were people, and there are also people, even my coworkers mentor me. And there are people who work for me who mentor me, who teach me stuff I don't know. And I think there's always this exchange of, you know, you teach me something, I'll teach you something. Or in my case, I've had such good luck with people passing it on to me that I'll never pay them back, but I'll pay them back by passing it on to somebody else. And it's sort of this generosity as an attitude of, I got a lot to give, let me give it to everybody I can give it to.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched a little bit on, you know, in a 5-year span, you went from, you know, radio in Mississippi to one of the leading radio markets in the United States. Can you just touch a little bit on your background of, you know, growing up in Mississippi, son of a preacher, and working radio at a young age, and how that kind of got you into entrepreneurship and started your career?
You know, I'm not sure. You know, you look back on your life and you try and figure out what the threads really were. So I'm going to tell you what I think my threads were. I'm not sure they were. But I grew up in Mississippi, as my dad was a Methodist minister, but not a fire and brimstone minister. He was a very well-educated guy, had his master's from Emory in Atlanta, which at that time in Mississippi, to have anyone who had a graduate degree who was not a lawyer or a doctor was unusual. And I came from a household that really valued thinking, and was very driven by a sense of right and wrong. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. When I went to school, started school, there were white schools and black schools. There were colored onlys and white onlys bathrooms. Some people, black, had to stand behind the white line in a bus. I mean, it was awful. And everything that happened in terms of changing that happened while I was in school. So by the time I was a senior in high school, my graduating class was almost 50-50 white-black. So everything happened in that period of time. So that really gave me this strong sense of equality. I mean, I think coming out of the Mississippi, it certainly gives you a sense of shame that could have gone on. And it's sort of affected, you know, who I am and what I am, probably as much as anything else. I also, I was in a horseback riding accident at age 6, lost an eye. So I'm this kid with one eye. Now the good news was this was during the draft. So I was automatically 4F, so I was not going to have to go to Vietnam. That was probably the only good thing about it. But having one eye probably gave me maybe a little bit of an outsider, which I think helped hone my marketing skills that I really had to understand. I was also a small, skinny kid with one eye in a world of big bullying, strapping Mississippi farm boys. So you had to learn to talk your way out of stuff, because there's no way I was going to compete with them or get along with them any other way. So I think that affected how I developed as a marketer. And I think I also came from a great, my brother, when my father died, said, you know, we won the parents' lottery. And I have parents who were incredibly supportive, unconditional, loving. I never saw my parents fight. They were just these very reasonable people. And the one thing we couldn't say in my house was hate. And my mother, if somebody was just a horrible human being, my mother would say, instead of, "Boy, I hate that guy," my mother would say, "I wonder why they want to be that way." So it was one of acceptance and one of understanding, and hopefully, again, you know, back to sort of generosity of spirit. And I think that hopefully set my character. And I think some of the things I saw, the good and bad, sort of set who I am and set the framework for my life. And I did learn to fly airplanes. I always loved airplanes. I was airplane nut. So that also affected my life because it's made me a traveler. Until recently, I rode motorcycles a lot, big cross-country trips. And I've flown airplanes for 50 years and have been all over the world and been in every continent and have circumnavigated the globe twice just for the fun of it.
Just for the fun of it. That's great. But yeah, I guess well, touching on your just your character, and you talked a little bit about marketing as well. You have a podcast titled Math and Magic, in which you talk about the unique discipline of marketing. Could you touch on what your definition of math and magic is and how that's applicable maybe to entrepreneurship?
Well, look, I think as a marketer or anybody who's building a product, there are two things you have to do in marketing. One is the math of marketing, and the other is the magic. So I've got to develop my analytics. I've got to understand what's going on in the world. And I think one of the biggest problems people have in marketing is they use their own bias, which gets them in a lot of trouble. I start a lot of meetings by saying, how many people in the room own a Tesla? And more than a few hands go up. And I go, well, that's less than 1% of the cars in America. How many people in the room have Sirius XM in your car? Maybe half the hands go up because that's about 10 or 15% of the cars in America. And I said, how many people in this room earn $67,000 a year or less? No hands go up usually. And I go, well, that's half of the households in America. So let's start with the fact that this room is not representative. And then let's begin to try and understand these people. And I think that you have to use a lot of research. You have to use a lot of data and analysis to get an understanding of what's going on, where people's preferences are, how they're buying, et cetera. But once you know that you're not going to cause somebody to buy something because you know who they are or you know where they are. You've got to have some magic. You're going to have something compelling. You've got to have something that excites people. And I first hit on this when I was in radio. There was an old radio programmer told me it's the math and magic, that a radio station has to be built on analytics, but it's got to be exciting as hell. You got to capture people's imagination. And I think that's true with every product. And I think that's ultimately true with every business. There are very few people who do both math and magic well. The few who do are extraordinary. And there are some people that do math so well that they win because of that. And there's some people that do magic so well, they win because of that. But the best outcome is usually when they build the team. And the team has both the mathematicians in it and the magicians in it. And that, I think, is the winning team.
Got it. So it's kind of you need to have both. You can't just go one side because otherwise you're going to miss the whole other side. That makes sense. And I guess applying that, maybe you said initially it was in radio, you heard math and magic, but of course, after WNBC in New York, you co-founded MTV, which was a brilliant creative idea, far ahead of its time, mainly because you were able to identify the pains of the consumer and fill the need. And I guess I'm just curious, how were you able to see that need and fill it, even when that was such an unpopular idea at the time?
Well, let me go up a level and let's talk about why cable networks emerged. Because when we started MTV, there were three networks: ABC, NBC, CBS, and cable was only in about 18% of the US households. And the big cities had not yet been built out for cable. And cable had been built to bring distant signals into a community that didn't have any TV signals, master antenna system. But when you get to New York City, I'm sorry, I don't need a distant signal from Syracuse, New York. I'm not interested in it. So they recognized, the cable industry, they needed some cable-only networks. HBO, Showtime, we had the movie channel, were some of the early ones. And then we said, look, we can probably do advertise-supported networks. And then you begin to say, okay, what's going to make cable work? Why is it going to work? It's going to work because there's one thing that underlies every consumer product, and that's convenience. The winning idea is always something that takes whatever you want to do and makes it easier. If you can do that, you'll win. And so the idea in TV was, with ABC, NBC, CBS, they gave me cartoons and kids programming Saturday morning. They gave me news at about 6 o'clock at night. They gave me music show on Friday night. They gave me a comedy show on Saturday night. So the idea was, instead of that, remember this is before the days of on-demand or even home video, is we would do these 24-hour-a-day channels that were one topic. so that the consumer, not that they're going to watch one topic, but that they can pick and choose from these 24-hour channels and put together the array of programming that was exactly right for them. So if I wanted my news at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd tune in at CNN at 3 o'clock. If I wanted music at 6 o'clock every night, I'd tune on MTV. If I wanted kids programming every day at noon, I'd turn on Nickelodeon every day. And we could pick and choose from that. Now, obviously today, the reason all those networks are in trouble is because we actually have on demand. I can just pick that stuff and watch it at that moment. But at that moment, that was the closest we came to on demand. And for the consumer, we were offering them enormous convenience. So now, what networks do you have? Well, Turner started CNN, barely. ESPN, I think, started with high school ping pong or something. It was like no major sports, but got started. And we started MTV. And the idea of MTV was that we were sort of going to do a video radio station. That, internally we said we're going to do to FM what FM did to AM, because just 10 years earlier, FM had come on the scene with stereo. Stereo, wow, that's great. Well, we're going to be video. And so the difference was that when we came on the scene, TV networks were really just delivery systems for the programs. And the programs are what people had the affinity for. Like they loved a certain show, but they really didn't know what network it was on. The networks had no image. With MTV and then with Nickelodeon, which we also own, we changed that. And we said, we're going to create MTV's going to be the star. And we're going to get people to tune in to MTV to see what's on. No one ever did that. They tuned in to find a particular show. In our case, we created this aura of what MTV was: cool, hip. We had contests. We had people on the air. We went to events. We were in the lives of our consumers, and we were hipper and cooler than they would imagine. And so that was the idea. And again, so we not only fit into what cable was doing, but we sort of changed the construct of TV. And I think one of the reasons that MTV worked is we had a generation that had grown up with rock and roll music and had grown up with TV, but the two had never come together. And people had tried, but it always failed. And I think the reason it failed was they kept trying to make music fit the TV form, which was a narrative story arc. So with MTV, we made TV fit the music form, which was mood and emotion and attitude. And that was the hallmark of MTV.
Yeah. And, so you touched on, you said convenience is kind of the consumer will always pick convenience. And it seems like convenience throughout all of your companies has been a primary concern. Six Flags, instead of people flying to Disney World, you bring Disney World to them. And I guess AOL chat rooms, instead of you going out to talk, socialize with people, do it from your computer. I guess I'm curious, what now being CEO of iHeartMedia, what do you see the convenience that you're giving to the consumer now as an audio company?
Well, look, I think it's, probably the number one thing we give the consumer is companionship. And we keep people company. And we keep people company, and they don't have to do all the work. All they got to do is turn on a button, and there we are. So we'll give everybody in America a friend anytime, anywhere. And I think that is, especially in this world of sort of a fragmented world, sort of polarizing world, friends are harder and harder to come by. So when you find somebody who's a spectacular person on the radio, they feel like they're their friend, and they don't feel like they're the star. It's sort of like a friend who's in the know. You go to the next door neighbor's house and they went to somebody's concert and they went backstage and they saw, oh, tell me about it. And that's the attitude that our people on air use when they talk about their lives, as opposed to trying to make themselves also a star. And the convenience is it's just always available. One of the reasons radio is so successful is there are 1 billion radios in America. There are only about 250 million smartphones. So the ratio of being able to find a radio is far in excess of other devices. And so the ability to just have it there is great. Now, one of the areas which were dwindling in terms of having convenience was in the home. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, every home had a clock radio next to the bed. That's down to probably 30%, 35% today. And we kept trying to figure out how we could get manufacturers to make more clock radios. And then Amazon invents Alexa. And you go, duh, of course, that's the new clock radio. And today, the number one use on Alexa is AM/FM radio. Number 2 is weather. And number 3 is Amazon Music. So again, they found a new radio that's convenient. And it's interesting, if you're in the car, you could use any of our radio stations on iHeart Radio app, or you can just push the button on the radio. And 95% of the people just push the button on the radio because convenience always wins.
Yeah. And I guess, iHeart Radio app, you guys, iHeart Media also focuses on podcasts. And I was wondering how you see podcasts fitting into the audio sphere of what you deal in.
Yeah, I sort of, if you think Netflix generally is TV on demand, podcast is radio on demand. That it is always available when you want to listen to it, exactly what you want, broken by a lot of different topics. Ultimate convenience of finding what you want. To us, we call it an adjacent business. And so for us, podcasters, we think sort of was our birthright. Of course, we know how to create radio. Of course, we know how to create it. And like radio, podcast is very host driven. It's not in TV, it's a lot of production value. It's a lot of, did you get the video? Did you get and podcasting, and in radio, it's who's the host. And so for us in podcasting, I think we've been successful because one, we know how to create that kind of content. And two, because it's such an adjacent business, we tell people on the radio about podcasting, go listen to the podcast, and we make hit podcasts because, oh, well, yeah, sure, I'll go do that. And because we reach so many more people with our radio than anybody else in America, we have a megaphone nobody else has. So we're bigger than the number 2 and 3 podcasters combined, which is the NPR and Wondery, which is Amazon. And I think we had 450 million downloads last month, and the next largest had about 150 million downloads. So we're just multiples above everyone else in it, but it's because we're also that much bigger when it comes to radio than anybody else, or when it comes to TV. Our broadcast radio reaches 90% of Americans every month. The biggest TV network reaches 35%. The biggest cable network, less than 20%. Spotify, less than 20%. So we sort of stand alone in terms of that reach. And we use that reach again and again to build new products and new businesses like podcasting.
Yeah. I guess going off that reach, I guess your reach, what I just think about is that you have an incredible breadth of companies under your belt. And to us as students, this is puzzling because we spend 4 years trying to master one discipline, whereas it seems like every 4 years you're on a new discipline. So how did you navigate such a wide array of industries, from radio, podcasting, MTV?
You know what? If you look at my history, I've never done anything except consumer businesses. I don't know anything about B2B, but I know the consumer. So my sense is that if I know the consumer and know the consumer well, it doesn't matter whether I'm trying to sell them a house or a cable network or an online service. It's the same human being and the same behaviors there. And to me, I look at like business is my golf. I love it. It's like I'm playing chess all the time. Or as I tell my kids when they say, "Daddy, why are you working so much?" I go, you know what? Work for me is like, my job is like the greatest video game you've ever seen. Can't wait to get up in the morning and start playing it. And at the end of the day, I don't want to put it away. And I think business to me, and for the people who do it well, I think it has that sort of fascination, that stimulation of it's always trying to figure out what's that puzzle, what is all this information telling me, and what can I do with it? What's the eureka moment? I load myself up with the data, and then I'm trying to figure out what do we build out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's just your range of experiences, I guess, gives you that perspective. And one experience that I find very interesting that you seem to be very avid about is that you were an early attender of Burning Man. And could you just talk about how that influences your business life and, your professional journey?
Look, I think it's professional and personal,
yeah.
But I think, as you guys don't know this yet, but as you get older, the problem as you age is the world narrows on you, that your blinders come on. You're not into, I'm going to play golf with Margaret every Friday afternoon, and every Saturday I'm going to the swim. You've got this routine that keeps you from seeing the fullness of life and the fullness of the world. And I think the hardest thing you have is something that helps you see new ideas and open your mind. And I found Burning Man as one of those great experiences. I went in 2004 for the first time. And when I walked out on the playa and saw all that, I went, whoa, the blinders just came off. And I recommend it to people who are sort of in that thing. I said, that's going through some problem in life or a bad marriage or lost their job or something. I said, come with me to Burning Man. And it will open your mind. And I started Casa Tequila with a lady named Berta Gonzalez. And I sort of had this idea for this smooth sipping tequila. And I sort of had in the back of my mind. And I was at a party in Brooklyn and I met this woman, started chatting with her. I said, so what do you do for a living? She goes, I run Jose Cuervo in North America. I go, quit your job, come be my partner, I have a great idea. And it took me 2 months and taking her and her partner to Burning Man for her to say, okay, I'll give it up. Because until she went to Burning Man, she was on the career path. She had gone to Northwestern, had been a consultant at Bain, was Jose Cuervo, a real straight ahead business person. And Burning Man sort of opened her mind to, wow, let's take a chance. And so I think it does that for a lot of people. It certainly does it for me. 100 years ago, if you were Jewish or Christian, you probably went to a summer retreat, a summer camp for a week or two. And people went every summer to renew their spirit. I think Burning Man for a lot of us is that, we need that week a year to sort of renew our spirit, open our mind, and remember that life's a lot different than we think it is, and that it's not so knowable. It's not really a plan. And you got to sort of open your mind to it.
Yeah. And then, like it's not a plan. Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So maybe could you tell us about a time maybe where you had a plan and nothing went to plan, but the outcome actually was better than you anticipated?
Sure. When I was a young person, I used to think I would get disappointed when things didn't happen as I thought they should. I had this great career at NBC. I was 20 years old. I was at NBC in Chicago. The president of NBC, Herb Schlosser, comes to town. He goes, kid, you're great. I'm going to build you a career here at NBC and you're going to TV. You're going to be our superstar TV programmer. So next step, WNBC in New York gives me a TV show after Saturday Night Live that I host and produce called Album Tracks. I'm doing everything I want to do. And there's a group that's sort of in a day before there was great equality, but there was a group of us called Herb's Boys. And it was Lorne Michaels who did Saturday Night Live, a guy named Dick Ebersol who did Late Night, went on to do NBC Sports, and a couple of others. And they called us that because Herb took a special interest in us. And we could just call Herb around our bosses. Our bosses had no power. We call it, hey, I know my boss wants to do it to Herb. I want to do this. And he would listen to us. So I was like set. They then kick Herb out. They put a new guy in at NBC. And I go, what? I'm devastated. Like this whole career path I had, this whole plan is shattered. Nothing. And so I got offered this job from Warner, sold half of their cable company to American Express, and they formed a programming company called Warner MX Satellite Entertainment Corporation, which today is MTV Networks. And they called me to be the programming guy. And I would have never considered being the programming guy. I was never leaving NBC. I was like in Fat City. And that was my plan. I was so disappointed. But I took this other job at Warner MX Satellite Entertainment Corporation. I went on to start MTV there. And I met Steve Ross. And it sort of built my career. So you never know. And when I was at Time Warner, I bought Six Flags theme parks for the company. They gave me a small equity piece. And Steve Ross was my great mentor. And Steve brought me back to the company to be his replacement, his successor. And then Steve died in 1993. And so I'm like, once again, I'm going, wow, I had this whole plan of Steve's got me on the plan, and then Steve passes away. Clearly I wasn't going to be a successor. And I wind up figuring out how we could sell Six Flags. And I turned out making more money selling Six Flags than I'd ever made on MTV or anything before. I would have never done that had I continued on. And oh, by the way, because of that, I went on to Century 21, which was just this weird opportunity that popped up because I was on the board of the company buying Century 21. And they offered me this sort of fantastic deal to come for 1 year to fix it up and get it integrated into the company. And I went and did it. And when I did this company, meaning, and I think, man, I made a real left turn and go into real estate. What on earth does this have to do with anything? And I say, I don't know anything about real estate, but there's this online thing. And I think maybe we could be the first real estate company to be online. So I call up a guy named Steve Case, who's running AOL. And I go, hey, I want to meet you for lunch. And I talk to him and I go, you know what? I'll give you $1 million a year if we can be your exclusive real estate area on AOL. And for him, it's like $1 million. Well, yeah, so I'll take it. And at the end of the meeting, he says, would you like me on my board? I think it might be helpful if you've been. And I go, it might be interesting. I learned something about this new thing called the internet. And it was just sort of the dumb luck. I hadn't planned. I never planned to go on the internet. And it was that sort of weird detour into real estate took me to AOL. And obviously, that probably of all the things I've done, it's been the most profound in terms of impact. We invented digital advertising, digital media. When I was there, AOL had half the traffic of the internet in the US came through AOL. And obviously, just in terms of financial reward was enormous compared to anything I had ever expected. But it came in unexpected ways. So every time I've tried to plan something, by the way, if I had a plan for myself when I was 20 years old that I would start a cable network and start something and take the internet to the mass market. Nobody even knew what a cable network was, and there was no such thing as the internet that anyone knew about. So it was impossible to plan it. You just sort of had to be there and say, yeah, I'll go left instead of right.
Yeah. And I guess, how did you just develop the courage to go left instead of right? Because, you kind of touched on not being afraid to fail, but I guess it's more.
Everything's a decision tree going out. You got all these choices. The younger you are, the more it looks like a honeycomb. You look at me, mine's a straight line from birth to here because I picked one thing. So that's the line. And ahead of me, I've still got a few honeycombs. I'm going to tell you the secret is that if any one of those you take is okay. Don't worry too much about it because any one of them you take can be a wonderful ride and a great opportunity. So if I had stayed at NBC instead of going to MTV, maybe I would have run NBC. Maybe I would have started new networks at NBC. You never know, but it's just take a path. The worst thing to do is be paralyzed and say, I can't do it, or to be completely caught up in your plan and say, well, I can't take that job because I got my own plan that in 3 years, I'm going to do this. In 4 years, I'm going to do that. In 5 years, I'm going to do that. Everyone I know who did that approach has been miserable about it. I've got so many people who say, God, I wish I'd taken that job you offered me back when you did. My plan didn't happen. I've never had anyone say, yeah, my plan worked out exactly as I'm glad I didn't take that job. So I think the opportunity is that, and look, you're in your 20s. The great thing about your 20s is this is the time to experiment. Try everything. Fail at everything. Time's on your side. When you get in your 30s, you sort of got to pick something that you think you want to do. 40s, you really begin to be the master of it. 50s, you reap the financial reward and success of it. 60s, you're winding down. But it is 20s, use it and use it well. Don't get too caught up in what you need to do. You can do anything you want to do.
That's great. That's good advice. And I guess now I've kind of gone over the limit here for the direct questions, but before we take questions from the crowd, if you want to ask Mr. Pittman a question, please use the Q&A feature. But before we do that, I'd like to just ask you one more question. You've been able to balance being a father and having a great career. I guess what's some advice you've given to your kids that you think would be applicable to us? You kind of explained, don't be scared that, but maybe something that I know.
Look, I think the most important thing is to understand what success is for you. And I preach to my kids, I preach to anybody who listens to me. You're going to spend more time doing your work than you are spending the money you make it work. So do something you love to do. do something that you just is fascinating to you. You can't wait to get to work and start working. And you can't, and at the end of the day, you don't want to stop. And that you want to talk about it all the time. You want to think about it all the time. Do something that really turns you on. And that's the happiness. And, you need to make enough money so you can pay the bills. But beyond that, everything else is gravy as long as you're enjoying yourself.
That's good. Yeah. Well, I guess now we'll turn it over to the audience questions. One question we got was, how were you able to find a mentor, and what was it that made you close with Steve?
You know what? I think mentors fall in your lap, just like jobs. Most things are, life is much more of a random walk than it is planned experience. So you bump into somebody and you just develop a relationship with them. And before you don't say, oh, I want you to be my mentor. You just start hanging out and you suddenly you realize this person's got an enormous influence on me, and I'm benefiting from it. I sort of recognize mentors more after the fact than I do when it's happening.
Yeah, I guess it's more just a friend who guides you in a way, and then afterwards you can call them a mentor.
Yeah. And it's just like I look back and say, that person really changed my life. But they didn't go into it saying, hey, kid, I'm going to change your life. Hang with me.
Yeah, because like you said, no one really knows what's going on. So and then Chloe Pei asks, what do you love most about your job?
I love about my job is that I can sort of invent things, can play around with things, get to noodle around with stuff. I've got an insatiable curiosity about everything. And I've got a job that allows me to use that curiosity and in the end, if I use it well, to make money.
That's good. Yeah, just using, like you said, building businesses it's a game for you and you enjoy it. Another question, is saying yes to too many opportunities or being selective? Sorry, I'm reading this wrong. Is it saying yes to many opportunities or being selective, saying no to many that helps? Maybe rhetorical. I assume that these weren't just single opportunities. Can you say you would like to try something for a few years, like starting a business?
I think you find out you can't do two things at once, usually. So I think you pick something, but once you pick it, just go with it and ride it. And the one thing you don't want to do is spend your time regretting what you didn't do. If only I had done that, or I wonder if I should have. Just commit to something and go all in and just enjoy the experience of being all in on something. And I think there's a time in my life when I had to say no to everything because I had a really busy job. And I stopped working when I was 49, thought I was going to retire. And the one thing I did when I retired is I said, I'm now going to say yes to everything. And if it turns out to be terrible, I won't do it anymore. But I'm going to just dive in. And that's the way I went to Burning Man. Someone just said, you go to Burning Man. I go, what's Burning Man? They just tried to think, okay, I'll give it a try. And it was just sort of see the world. I'm a pilot, and in that period of time, and I had two younger kids, then I had an older son, and I took the two young kids to 50 countries by the time they were 10. And I think I have my plane in 75 countries. So if people say, so-and-so's opening an art gallery in Athens, I go, let's go, jump in. When is it? Next weekend, let's go. And it was just sort of see the world. And, oh, by the way, I'm flying over Beirut. Let's stop and see Beirut. I've never seen Beirut. So it's just like this, open your mind to the spontaneity of life. You don't have a lot of chances to do it, but when you have those, take advantage of them.
Yeah, I guess it's tough for us. The spontaneity is kind of, it's hard to think about when school's so rigid and structured to it. So I guess it's helpful to hear that because we don't hear that all too often.
Probably why I'm not a college graduate.
Oh, I guess follow-up question to that is, how do you feel that maybe not going to college helped your career? And maybe what do you think we could take as college students from that?
Oh, it's interesting. I went to college wherever I worked. And so my freshman year, I went to Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi. My sophomore year, I went to Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. My junior year, I was in I was in Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh, and my senior year, I was enrolled at the University of Chicago. And I realized I'm 20 and I replaced a guy who was 47 years old. And I got this great opportunity. Maybe I should wait out a semester. So I kept deferring and deferring, deferring. And then 3 years later, they sent me to New York and go, I'm never going to finish college. But it was not because I didn't. I loved college and I loved the experience of it. I learned a lot there. And my dad always told me, get out of that radio. You just take your time to enjoy college. Says the only 4 years of your life, you're not going to have any responsibility. Said, I can afford to send you to college. Just go to college. And I ignored him. Years later, he and my mom said, yeah, sure, I'm glad you didn't listen to us about quitting your job. But it was, I ran out of time. I couldn't do it all. But it was a great experience.
Yeah, that's good. I guess this next question is a follow-up to your previous answer. But how do you know when an idea or a path is not right for you and requires a pivot versus powering through the difficult times because they might get better?
Wow, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest problems people have is they pivot too quickly. That if you've got something you believe in, it's something you want to do, it's not going to be easy. And if you keep pivoting, you'll never accomplish anything. That the goal is keep going. When you absolutely get just flattened out and you can't do it, then that's, I guess, when you give up. But I think you don't give up. You probably learn something. Someone told me, we either win or we learn something. Every failure is a teaching experience. And I often think about, and I was talking to my kids about it, that a failure and a success is the same thing. It's a stepping stone. And so in the only difference, what we call a failure is when I step on it, I turn right or left. And a success is I keep going on the same path. But they're just stepping stones. And so you're never going to arrive anywhere. There is no end. You're just moving. It's a journey. And, some people use, and I like the idea that maybe we're floating down a river on a raft, and around every corner and every turn is something wildly interesting if we just sit back and enjoy it. But if we try and get off the raft and swim somewhere, there are crocodiles in the water, there's terrible current, I could drown. So just go with the flow. And part of it in life, the hardest part is to get a sense of that balance between go with the flow. And by the way, when you hit a wall, then figure out, what do I do now? And to me, that's the great challenge that Berta Gonzalez, who I absolutely love, who is my co-founder of Casa with me, is Berta runs the company, is the CEO. And Berta was, even from the earliest days, she'd call and say, we've got a problem, and here's what we should do about it. I found the problem, but not like, oh my God. It was like, found a problem, here's the solution. And she would keep trying the solutions until she got through the hurdle. And I think that tenacity and that idea of, well, it's okay, I got a problem. We have something at iHeart, one of our values called we welcome dissent. And there's an interesting story of when John Kennedy announced we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade in 1963. He had no plan. It was a political announcement. He had not told NASA he was going to make that announcement. They heard it on the news, and as you might imagine, went absolute batshit. So then they have to go have these meetings with these NASA people who are like in open revolt, and they go, we can't put a man on the moon. And this was the smart thing. They go, why? Well, we don't have rocket fuel. We don't have heat shield. We don't have we don't have navigation, all this whole list. And so then they look at them and go, okay, so what you're telling me is once we solve all these problems, we can put a man on the moon, right? And they built these teams of experts. First time it wasn't a military model, it wasn't a general, a private, et cetera. It was all these equals. They picked one person as team leader to solve each one of these problems. And the dissenters, the complainers, the problems built the plan to put a man on the moon. And I think that happens in business all the time if you'll open your mind to, this isn't working. Why? Why isn't it working? And if you can tell me the problem, I can find the solution. If you just say it's not working, it's terrible, we're going nowhere, then I'm paralyzed. So it's this push to understand it and to figure out how to handle it.
Yeah. I guess it's, you said earlier, Michael Jordan missed 26 game-winning shots. So it's every missed shot is a step in the right direction.
Right.
But this next question is more about iHeart. But Chernov asks, what set iHeartRadio apart from its competitors during its early phases?
Are you talking about the app or the radio stations or
I
what?
assume just the radio stations in the beginning.
Look, a guy named Lowry Mays put together this assortment of companies. Until the early 90s, the federal government restricted ownership of radio to 7 markets and 1 AM and 1 FM in every market. When they took these restrictions off, Lowry Mays began rolling up and consolidating the radio business. And he did it to such an extent, I don't think it's probably one of the best consolidations of any industry. And today, iHeart has a reach of about twice as much as the next largest radio company. And that has just been a tremendous advantage. Being able to reach 90% of Americans with one company puts us in a very unique position. The only thing that comes close is Facebook and Google are like within a point or two of us in terms of reaching people in America. And after the 3 of us, it falls off to about 50% or 40%. So that to me was probably the greatest advantage of iHeart. And then when I came into the company, what I did was use that scale to build out a digital business, events business, podcasting business, and to expand the radio business. So we put all the radio stations under this master brand of iHeartRadio, sort of like, Pixar, all the animated films are under the umbrella of Pixar. And if you know an animated film's a Pixar film, you probably think it's better. And actually, the research says that if you know a radio station is an iHeart radio station, your score goes up about 30% in terms of how good the station's going to be in terms of expectation.
Got it. Yeah, it was Lowry Mays and all of iHeart. It was a brilliant idea. I'm glad it worked out. But Laura asks a question as well. She says, it's more of a niche question, but what are your thoughts or experience on the sector of media in emerging markets like Nigeria?
I wish I knew more about it. I don't. My friend Tom Freston knows a lot about it, who is my successor at MTV. And Tom did a lot of stuff in Afghanistan and has done in some of the countries around the world in emerging markets. But look, I think at the end of the day, media is still desirable by people. The question is, how much can they pay? How can you build your business model, both in terms of cost and in terms of revenue, to make it a success?
Yeah. And then I guess I'll wrap it up here with one last question is, we've talked about your experiences, how you've gotten here, but I guess, what do you see as next for both iHeart, podcasting, and maybe you personally?
Well, at my age, what's on the horizon is not wonderful because you get, I'm on those final years. But it's, to me, it's been great because I get to mentor people. I get to help people. As you get older, your memory goes to shit, but your pattern recognition goes through the roof. So I get to have a lot of experiences. Oh, I've seen that movie before. I sort of know what's going to happen next, and that's fun. But I think in terms of iHeart, I think we continue to grow. Audio's never been bigger. Audio's been growing like crazy. It's now 31% of media consumption among consumers is with audio. And one of the growth engines for it is the death of what I would call peace and quiet. There used to be times when people go, now peace and quiet. Nobody has peace and quiet anymore. They fill up every second of their day with something on this phone or something on their TV or something in their headphones. And audio was one of the areas that people ran out of time for their eyeballs. They read everything anytime they could use their eyeballs, they're reading everything or watching everything they could, but they had time for their ears. And that's what audio began to fill. And that's, I think, why audio has been on such a tear in terms of a growth business.
Yeah. And then, looks like we're at 3:50. I guess we have time for one more question. I'd like to respect everyone's time, but Chris asks, this looks like our last question. I'm curious to see how you can fight against Spotify. How has streaming media influenced the world? As you know, Silicon Valley, Spotify is kind of not dominating, but it's a force that a lot of students here use. So we're just curious to see what your thoughts are on Spotify versus iHeart.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're in a completely different business than we're in.
Yeah.
They are, Spotify, if you go back to the history, what are the ancestors of Spotify? Before that, it was Apple downloads. As a matter of fact, the first Spotify interface, if you remember, looked just like your Apple download interface, except it was reversed. So instead of white background, it's a black background. So it's a comfort zone. So you just went from that to subscription. Before that, it was obviously you bought CDs, you did mixtapes, etc. And so that was your music collection. And we're in the radio business. And in your music collection, when do you listen to your music collection? When you want to escape the world. When you just don't want to be engaged with others and be in it. Radio is when you want to know what's going on in the world. We have radio personalities do a lot of talking, and 25% of our stations don't play any music at all. News talk, opinion, sports talk, etc. And so for us, what's common among that is that engaged experience. So you'll see people listening to music in their car on Spotify, or by the way, surprising number of people still have CDs in their car, and suddenly they just switch to the radio. Why'd they do that? Because we're social animals. We can't be away from humans too long. And radio is the place where you always find the human, and you always find the human connection. And the relationship between a music collection and radio has been a symbiotic relationship forever. You heard a song on the radio, you went and bought the record. You hear a song today on the radio, and you start listening to it on Spotify when you go to your music collection. So the two are tied together, but I don't think competitive at all. Really doing a different thing. Now, Spotify does compete with Amazon Music or Apple, or in some cases still people have downloads on their phones that they're listening to. And again, shockingly, 5% of people still actually listen to tape cassettes in their car. It's the music collection has still got a rich background of what people do.
Tape cassette. I didn't even realize that was that's interesting to hear.
It's a shocking one.
Yeah. My grandmother listens to CDs, or actually my uncle too listens to CDs too. So I understand that point. But so it's 3:53 now. We can take one more question if you'd like. Sorry, I've got some more here. I guess do one more and then.
Great.
And this last question is, what is the first thing you think of when you wake up?
Am I alive? Or is this a simulation? It depends on what's going on. I go walk the dog is usually the first thing I think about. But I start my day sort of trying to open my mind and just sort of let things filter in. I work out in the morning and sort of like let things flow, catch up on email, and then I take a really long hot shower, and that's my meditation. And in that meditation in the shower is when all my great ideas come. Most people who do a creative process say you don't have a process of creativity. You load your brain up with everything you're worrying about, thinking about, or need to know, and then you forget about it. And in your most relaxed state, the answer pops in your head. There's a brilliant a professor at Stanford called David Eagleman, who wrote the book Incognito: The Secret Lives of the Brain. I just did a podcast with him this season on math and magic. And I have had his book in my office for years. And when people start having a great marketing discussion, I grab a copy and I go, I'm going to give you the greatest marketing book you'll ever have, Incognito: The Secret Lives of the Brain. And of course, one of the things in the book is that most of us is not our conscious self. It's our subconscious. And the subconscious is doing all this work. How did I wind up with that great, brilliant answer I had? My subconscious has been working on it. And when it finally figures it out, it kicks it up to the conscious. But you got to give it a very relaxed state to get there. So whether it's going to bed or waking up in the morning or taking a hot shower, I think all of us need that moment where it's just like nothing's in our brain. And then you let something pop in from seemingly out of nowhere, but it's from your companion, which is your subconscious.
That's interesting. I'll have to read Mr. Eagleman's book, but I've heard very good things about his class. But with that, though, I think that concludes our talk here. Thank you very much, Mr. Pittman.
Thank you.
And
Great
thank you
fun.
everyone for joining. I know everyone's busy here, but I think it's very valuable to hear from you and learn from you. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Okay, and I will end the webinar now. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.